Hey everybody, this is my Mimighoul deck profile post-Rota, featuring a setup that's been requested. It's a slightly different one to the build that people are usually using, but I will get into it right now. So I'm going to start off with the main card in the deck. We go with a one-of Mimighoul Master. Mimighoul Master, great card on his own. We've got the extra deck space now with the new cards post-Rota, so we can actually cheat this guy out from Grave deck, and he comes up quite often. He's obviously a search on his own, so that's really, really useful. Next up, we've got the main starter of the deck, the card that everybody loves to see. We've got 3 copies of Mimighoul Dragon. So Mimighoul Dragon, very, very simple. Obviously, like every other Mimighoul flip monster, he has the ability to summon to his opponent's board, which is really great for breaking boards. And it can be a really great last minute, piece of interaction that your opponent was unfortunately having to play around. But also he adds a spell or trap when he's normal summoned, so he's a really, really great normal summon as well, because that can get you things like your dungeon or your Maker. And Maker got a really substantial buff with the new support, because now Maker is always full combo. So this guy is utterly amazing. He also, under the effect of the field spell, becomes a pretty significant beta. He becomes 2500, and that's not something people should ignore. So next up, this one is one I'm considering debating because I'm only running 2 copies of Archfiend. Archfiend, again, is a really, really great card for the deck. He's really great for generating advantage in a more grindy situation, which often Mimighoul finds itself in, because Mimighoul isn't the kind of deck that can one-turn kill. It's just not really how the deck functions. You need to get into a more grind. You need to wear your opponent's resources down, and Archfiend's perfect for that with its flip effect. It also is on summon effect is really good, because if you're in a situation where you say you start with both of these, you can set one to your opponent's field, you can summon your other, and then flip this one. And in that case, your opponent loses the advantage, and you get the other one to your board anyway. And now you have 2 level 1s to do. You can link them off, you can Xyz them, you can do whatever you like with them. So Archfiend's a really great card. I am considering putting this to 3, and I'll show you the card I'm considering reducing to 1, or reducing down next. So one of the new pieces of support we got, Mimighoul Fairy, really great extender. The only downside of this card is I wish you could use its extension effect and its summon effect in the same turn, but that's whatever. So Fairy says, if you control any other Mimighoul, so if you've normal summoned Dragon or you have Master, so you can go Master Search this. This is a free special summon, so it goes to your side of the board, or anytime like any of the other Mimighouls, you can put it on your opponent's side of the board, face down. Its Floodgate effect is really, really great in some decks. Against others, it just won't really help. I mean, for example, if you manage to get 2 of these on your opponent's side of the board, say if you go Mimighoul Room to set 1 and use the effect to set the other, Snake Eyes players won't be able to use Diabellstar's effect. They won't be able to use Poplar's effect. If they special summon Ash for whatever reason, they won't be able to use Ash effect. So this can lock them out of specific things, but this can basically just force some decks to entirely stop playing. The Floodgate is too strong for them. So this is a really useful card. I am considering cutting this to 2, because although 3 fairies is great, seeing 2 of them in your opening hand feels bad, although you can normal summon 1 and then use the effect of the other, I believe. Yeah, it doesn't say specifically that you can't control the Mimighoul Fairy. That's something that I have to check. But you can do that to get 2 level 1s on board. But would you rather have that or an Archfiend? That's something I'm deciding, and it's better for names in deck as well with things like Maker, because that is names dependent. So the next card, we have a single copy of Mimighoul Slime and a single copy of Mimighoul Armor. Mimighoul Armor is another really great extender. It just says if your opponent controls a monster, you can special summon it. So he's not awful to see in your opening hand. There are better cards to see, but that's why he's a 1. He's a name. For Mimighoul Maker purposes, if you start running out of targets for names for Maker, things can get a little bit complicated, and this is always your backup. You're always going to have Armor in your deck at some point that you can just go Armor. He becomes 2100 as well under the effect of the field spell, which is kind of useful. And yeah, so Mimighoul Slime is another really great one. This is why Mimighoul Maker is full combo now. This basically can go, you know, we can pick Archfiend as a target and Slime as a target, and regardless of what happens, we're getting at least one level 1. But if we get the Archfiend in our hand and the Slime on our opponent's board, that basically means we can go +2 out of that. We can summon another Mimigal from decks, you can cheat out a Master if you really need the bounces, a Mimigal Throne, or you can go, I need another Dragon, I haven't seen Dragon this turn yet, and that gets you another Spell and Trap. So that could set up lots of important interactions. So these guys are both really good. Unfortunately, they are one-offs, just because their extension effects aren't brilliant, but they are very, very useful cards in the deck, especially Slime. So this, the star of the deck, 3 copies of Mimigal Dungeon. Mimigal Dungeon, excellent card, one of the weirdest floodgates in the game, and I really, really love it because it does nothing inherently on its own. And it forces some really interesting interactions between you and your opponent. A lot of the ruling disputes that end up coming up with this deck is how things work with face downs, and I think that's really funny. I personally really love it. Obviously, some opponents really, really don't. So Mimigal Dungeon, it does nothing on activation, but when you activate it, you can add any Mimigal monster from your deck or graveyard to your hand. And the graveyard effect is really good because that does actually play around draw. But yeah. So this just gets you any piece you need. So if you start with this in your hand, you can search Dragon, and that's full combo because normal summon Dragon is full combo. But you can also do things like set this up later in the turn. You can also bounce this back to your hand on the effect of Mimigal Room. So if somebody goes to Cosmic it, sure, you don't have it on the field anymore, but you do have it again for next turn. And that could be quite useful as well. These are once per turn, obviously. The search effect is once per turn, but the Floodgate is while your opponent or either player, controls a face-down set monster, they cannot normal summon, and they cannot attack with monsters that were special summoned this turn. So that means they can set to their own board if they want to, for whatever reason. They can tribute set to their own board, so they can tribute your own Mimigals off the field, but they do have to replace it with their own face down, which is just going to put your Mimigals in your grave, which means that next turn you can just add them from your grave to your hand again by the effect of Dungeon. So this is a really, really strong card. Next up, we have 3 copies of Maker. Maker was a card that before the Rota support was very disappointing. It had the potential to be good, but that's it. It had a 50-50 shot of being good. Now it has some definitely better targets that are always going to get you things you want. So, for example, the main ones that people tend to go for is 1 copy of Archfiend as a target and 1 copy of Slime as a target. And that means you're always going to get at least the Archfiend. You're always going to get at least the Slime. But on the best case scenario, you actually get the Archfiend, the Slime, and you also get another monster from your deck. So it just gets you to cheat out anything out. It also does have a graveyard effect, which is really useful. And it does come up where when your opponent special summons, where bear in mind, if they're playing under the field spell, they can't normal summon. So when they special summon, you can flip up one of your Mimigals, which means that you can flip up a Fairy to floodgate them, you can flip up an Archfiend to give you advantage, you can flip up a Dragon to just board wipe them. There's things you can do here, and there's some really interesting stuff with it. To explain the main effect a little bit better, you reveal 2 different flip effect names in your deck. You then randomly determine, so flip a coin, roll a dice, odds, evens, which one of them to summon to your opponent's board. So that one goes face down, and then the other one returns to your hand. And at that point, at the end of the effect, you can then special summon any Mimigal, so not necessarily the one you put back to your hand, to your board. So this is good for if you want to cheat out, say, Master. Say you got unlucky and you drew Mimigal Maker and a Master for turn, for your first opening hand. You can cheat out your Master, and it means that you've saved your normal summons, say, if you want to use Master's effect to add a Dragon, and then you can add the field spell and go from there. So that it gives it more versatility, and this is a very versatile card. I really, really like it. Next up, I run 3 copies of Mimigal Room. I think Mimigal Room is great. This card, weirdly enough, is basically a better Book of Moon. I think it's really great. It doesn't target, and also it's a starter. So in the really weird situation where I haven't drawn any of my Mimigal Engine, I've just got 1 copy of Mimigal Room. It is technically a starter and a Book of Moon. The only part is that people want to cut this card because it's a trap. Traps, obviously, in this format, or any modern format, they're a little bit slower. There are ways to remedy this, but generally, Mimigal is a slow deck as it is. Mimigal Room is a perfect card in Mimigal. It's just that Mimikor itself is a slow deck. So people try to work around this. I've decided to fully embrace this. Mimikor Room says you can summon a Mimikor from hand or deck to either your field or your opponent's field. So this can get you Dragon from deck, which is obviously a starter. But it can also be used to, under the effect of Mimikor Dungeon, to basically just stop your opponent from being able to play. They can normal summon if they've got nothing on their board. Say they flipped up an Archfiend, and now they're down one in card advantage. They normal summon, you just chain Mimikor Room. If they've got no on summon effect for some reason, you can Book of Moon their normal summon. You can summon another one to their board, and now they have 2 monsters on their board that they cannot flip up this turn, unless they do it by effect, I suppose. And that basically prevents them from attacking. It prevents them from, killing you that turn, essentially. And then this can sit in your grave, and you can banish it, and then bounce things back to your hand, so you can reuse it to dodge things like Droplet, because Droplet will come up with this deck. People will try to tribute your own Mimikors off of their board, which is unfortunate. That's how it works. So that is the entire Mimikor engine. I then want to show off the more interesting part of this deck. So in this deck, I have decided to run a very, very minimal Labyrinth engine. So Labyrinth is obviously very good with traps. Lady itself can, when Lady effect activates, can get you another trap, which you can use if you don't have a Mimikor Room to get yourself a Mimikor Room for the beginning of your next turn. But this was kind of inspired by the Josh Schmidt build of Labyrinth, where he decided to basically cut back on the Labyrinth engine as much as possible, because things like Ariana and Ariane are just imperm magnets. They just eat imperm like it's nobody's business. If there's going to be an Ash, they're going to Ash you there, and that can be quite frustrating. And I wanted to reduce that to some degree, because they eat your normal summon, and they're just going to eat an interaction that otherwise, if I ended up with level 1 on board, at least then I could Xyz into something more useful. Obviously, this is also a normal trap, so you've got things like Lady interaction to summon another Lady, which is a weird one, but you run 2 mainly so that you are very unlikely to draw your only copy, and it kind of reduces the advantage for Big Welcome. But 2 ladies, quite often you'll end up playing just Lady control with this deck if people cut you out of your Mimikor engine completely, and this can be very oppressive on its own. So next card, like obviously the reveal now is that I'm playing a more trap heavy variant of the deck, to end up as more of a control strategy, embracing the floodgate that is Mimikor Dungeon. So very standard. We've got 3 copies of Trap Trick. Trap Trick gets you what you want. I don't think that needs too much of an explainer, other than you need to make sure you sequence things correctly with Trap Trick, because things can get messy if you Trap Trick too early. I then have the other star of the deck, and this is the one where I think if you're playing Labyrinth, you kind of have to. I'm running 3 copies of Simultaneous Equation Cannons. This card is mental. This card confuses the absolute hell out of the game state every time it flips up, because your opponent will scramble as quickly as possible to A, understand the card, B, make sure that you can't resolve it fully, and C, do everything in their power to try and change the board state. And this can get really chaotic, and if you set yourself up well and you get a little bit lucky, and it's also matchup dependent, this can just be a win con in its own right. This can clear your opponent's entire field, and there's nothing they can do about it. This card is stupidly strong, and with Mimigors, there is a case to be made that they don't use the extra deck too much, so it's possible. So next up, we've got 2 offs. These are just basically so you can search them with Trap Trick. Daruma. Daruma is amazing in this deck. When you have a floodgate that says if your opponent has face down monsters, they can't do X and Y, Daruma says they can't do anything. This is also destroys links. It's really good for outing towers. This is like the start. This is like an amazing card. I love this card. An interesting thing you can do is obviously your Mimikor monsters face down on your board is really bad news for you. So you can go Chainlink 1 Daruma, and then do Chainlink 2 Mimikor Room effect in Graveyard to banish it, to bounce your level 1 Mimikors back to your hand, and that way they don't get flipped face down with Daruma, and you don't have to worry about their negative flip effects on your turn. So that could be really, really useful as well. Plus also bouncing, like say, a Dragon and an Archfiend back to your turn gives you the potential to do things like board breaking next turn, or getting yourself more advantage as well. Another card that's really, really great that often pops up in regular Labyrinth decks is 2 of Terrors of the Overroot. Labyrinth uses as a form of removal for Lovely, which I'm not actually running. I did run an All Versions deck with Lovely, and I'll consider it, add it back in, but at the minute I just need the deck room. So Terrors of the Overroot, really, really great as just a regular removal trap. Target one in their graveyard, target one in their field, and then send the other to the grave, set the one you targeted in grave. So while this is really great as just a regular form of removal, this also has the added benefit of setting a card, which means that you can also use this to lock out your opponent's normal summon via Mimical Dungeon. So you can do stupid things like if your opponent shifters you, which I should clarify, this deck is a shifter deck, it doesn't care about shifter. You can send, say, a field spell or their normal summon and just set the shifter to the field, and now they are like, what are they supposed to do from that? You know, they've shifted you, they've wasted a card in their hand, they've given you a target to put face down on their field, now they can't normal summon, or they can't attack. And then I have 2 of Simul Archfiends. Simul Archfiends is, for people who don't know, it's basically similar to D-Barrier, apart from they get 1, and they can only have 1 on the field that turn. But this essentially kills link climbing decks. You can't link climb under the effect of Simul Archfiends. So if you think Fiendsmith Engine, where they go Closed Moon into Requiem, and then Requiem effect, they can't do that. They can't attempt to summon Requiem while they control Closed Moon, because they're both link monsters. This also does things like stopping any deck that goes really, really hard into one extra deck type. So think White Forest with Synchros, think Gimmick Puppet with Xyz. This just stops them from being able to play more than one, and this can really, really disrupt them. And then for the last card in the deck, I have 3 copies of, like I mentioned earlier, Shifter. This is my only hand trap in the deck. Mimicals don't really particularly care about Shifter. I think if you're going for like a Mimical combo, which is like smaller than most combos in a deck, you end up sending 1 trap and 1 maker to the grave, which sure you don't get their extra effects, which can hurt you, but realistically you're not really losing that much an advantage. Shifter, great, stops a lot of decks from being able to play this format, and it is unfortunate, but I think it's necessary. So that's everything for the main deck. We'll move on to the extra deck now. So obviously, because I'm running simultaneous equation cannons, this makes the extra deck a little bit weird. So we'll get the extra deck out of the way quick, because most of these cards you're not even using, you're just using them for cannons targets. So I have gone with the maximum possible cannons targets, which is weird for some people. Sorry, let me just turn these cards around for you guys. So we've got fusions level 1 through 5, and we've got level 3 Xyz. Sorry, rank 4 Xyz, rank 5s, and rank 6s. So this does take up pretty much, let's just move that one for you, the entirety of my extra deck, but there is a reason for this. Basically, with this setup, you can hit anything from as low as level 4s, which is very unlikely, but it is possible, to as high as level 11s. I haven't gone for 12s. I found 12s don't come up very, very often unless you're finding yourself playing against pretty much exclusively Centurion, which is coming up more. So I'll consider it. But yeah, this card is crazy. Obviously, the amount of room you dedicate to the extra deck does hurt. I think if I was to try and slim this down anymore, this is 13 cards, by the way, I would try and slim it down to a way where I could run a Zeus, because Mimicals really make Zeus really, really easy, and maybe something like a Typhon for breaking and shutting down people's boards. But the most important thing to run out of all of this, like I said, these are all useless. You will never be able to summon any of these. The one that is useful are these 2 just here, which is the Hugin and the Munin, and this is for a specific setup that can appear in the side deck in certain matchups. So just keep that in mind. Okay, so the other 2 cards, the other 2 slots that I run in this extra deck, very, very obviously, are the one-ofs of the 2 Mimicals Xyz. In a standard pure Mimical setup, you would run probably 2 of each. I am choosing to run 1 of each because you theoretically use Room Effect to bounce them back to your extra deck if you need to, but you can also use Dungeon Effect to get them back from your graveyard. This does lose flexibility, but it means you have to pick when to use these slightly more careful, and they are very, very important to the deck. So Mimigul Throne obviously has the effect of detach 1 and then summon Master from pretty much anywhere that's not banished. This is crazy. It's also a bounce, so on the off chance you manage to draw Master, which is unfortunate, you can equip this as an equip spell, and then the effect of this gets to bounce, non-target bounce, 2 cards on the field. You can use this to bounce your own Mimiguls from your opponent's of the field if you need to attack, with monsters that can't attack directly. Or you can use this to bounce your opponents, things like continuous spells, field spells, things like that. If you need them gone before they resolve, this can be really useful. Giant Mimigul is one of my favorite cards in the game. I absolutely love this card. I have no idea what draws me to it so much. On summon, it searches any Mimigul card, so it gets you the exact point of interaction that you need on your turn. And also, it has an effect to detach 1 material and target cards on the field up to the number of face downs your opponent controls, and then pop those cards. Bear in mind it says cards, not opponent's cards, so you can pop your own cards with this effect. And then burn your opponent for 1,000 for each destroyed. This will win you games in time, like a lot. This is really, really good. The amount of burn you can deal very quickly, especially if you have things like Daruma to just Book of Moon your entire opponent field, can go silly because you just summon as many monsters to your board as possible. Target, say, 4 if your opponent has 4 booked monsters, and then burn them for 4,000 in 1 turn is silly. Like, really, really silly. Giant's effect also says that all your non-Xyz Mimiguls can attack directly while this card's face up. Crazy. If you consider that Mimigul Dungeon is making your cards, 2,500, it makes Master, 3k, and then if you equip it with this, it makes it 4k. 4k direct is not something your opponent can ignore. It's 4k direct, cannot be destroyed by card effect, cannot be destroyed by battle. It's crazy. So that's everything for the deck itself. The deck is a 40-card deck. Obviously, with simultaneous equation cannons, a lot of your extra deck is, almost entirely all of your extra deck is devoted to cannons targets. So I understand why that might feel bad for some people, but trust me, once you start figuring out the maths on simultaneous equation cannons, the deck is great. So for my side, I have 3 copies of Arius. Obviously, Arius is summonable off of Big Welcome, but I mainly use him as a pseudo hand trap because when you start siding more traps into the deck, this can be really important. Shifter hurts so many decks at the minute that having another form of Shifter, or say Daruma to flip your opponent's entire field face down, or some kind of point of interaction is really, really useful. Even if you draw this and say a copy of Mimigul Room and no other engine, this could be really, really useful because you can do this at the end of your opponent's main, Book of Moon, a really important monster that they might need for their end board, and then summon Mimigul Dragon to then act as a starter. That can be really, really useful. Arius is a really weird card, but I personally think he's very useful for the certain things you can pull off from this deck. I also have 3 copies of Retaliating Sea. I think Retaliating Sea is another copy of Shifter this format. I really dislike Shifter, but this deck needs it, unfortunately. This hurts Azamina. This hurts things like Gimmick Puppet. Anything that uses a rank up spell, this really, really hurts. And I think this is really, really important as well, this format. The body itself doesn't particularly matter to you. It's annoying, but you can continue playing under it. And worst comes to worst, you can use Giant Mimigul's effect to pop it for a 3,000 burn before it's impactful to anything on your end board as well. But this card definitely hurts your opponent more than it hurts you. I then have 2 copies of D-Barrier. This is necessary for things like Tempai matchups. You need to be able to D-Barrier, and it's also why things like Arius are important, because you can do interesting situations where you can save your D-Barrier until you need it, and it's safe in your hand. I also have 2 copies of DDG. This is essentially Shifter, but for monsters, and this is why I have things like Arius here, because DDG just means that certain decks also still cannot play. Nobody's really complaining about Shifter for the spell and traps it sends to the graveyard. It's always the monsters, and this will do that too. And then I have 3 copies of Ice Dragon's Prison. Ice Dragon's Prison is here as a 3-of specifically, because this deck sometimes can run into issues with decks that don't particularly care about simultaneous equation cannons. Things like link decks, things that run entirely links, so Salamangreat, things like that, will not be affected by simultaneous equation cannons at all. And there's also going to be the odd deck where the maths just cannot work out in your favor. Like I said, Centurion at the minute, although I might think of tweaking that because Centurion is a lot more popular at the minute. This is just a very simple form of removal. It banishes a card, so this can be used to remove important one-obs. It can do interesting things with that, and it's a very, very important card for interaction. This is unfortunately only 13 cards. The other 2-obs is I've misplaced them at the moment, and they would be 2 copies of either Runic Flashing Fire or Runic Freezing Curses. So the reason why those are so important is because they add the ability to either pop a special summon monster or negate a monster. So think of another copy of Imperm, which we aren't actually running. They are useful for that effect. Obviously, you can set them. We're not running Fountain, so we're not too worried about the quick effect from hand, but they are quick effect spells anyway. Oh, sorry, quick spells anyway. But what you can do is if you were to draw, say, a copy of Runic Flashing Fire, you can set it going first, and then wait until your opponent's turn. And if your opponent was to go Lightning Storm and attempt to destroy your board, you can summon the Hugin that is in your extra deck. So where is Hugin? There's Hugin. You can summon your Hugin, protect your board, and then Hugin actually banishes itself as part of that effect, which means that it's waiting in your banished pile for the second effect of simultaneous equation cannons. And that can be really, really useful. Like on its own, not getting Lightning Stormed is very strong to this deck, just the same as playing in Labyrinth. So being able to protect your cards from that can and will win you duels. I side it in because it's not searchable, and obviously not everybody is going to be running board breakers, so it's not necessarily all you have to worry about. But essentially, yeah, that's it for the deck, guys. I really, really enjoy playing this deck. It's definitely one of my most fun decks I've ever played at the moment. Obviously, it running Shifter is a bit bleh, but there's hope that Shifter might be banned, so I don't know how that'll affect this deck, but I might switch over to a more hand trap heavy variant of it if that's the case. If you've got any questions, feel free to ask me in the comments. I can do a little bit more in-depth explainer if people ask me to. But yeah, thank you very much, guys.